It's as if there are two Vladimir Putins. The first Putin meets with leaders of Asian countries in Samarkand, outside Russia, and gives assurances to India's Prime Minister Modi and to Turkey's President Erdogan that he wants to put his war with Ukraine to an end, sooner rather than later. The second Putin returns home and dramatically escalates the war a few days later. He declares a mass, though officially limited, mobilization and an urgent annexation of the occupied territories of Ukraine. The reason behind the actions of these two Putins is the same. He is losing the criminal and bloody war he started in Ukraine 6 months ago. But the first Putin finds himself in the real world, while the second one in his fictional universe, in the Orwellian dystopia he had been building over the course of the last 22 years. And it is finally clear. He will never be able to abandon this fictional universe. For Putin, after September 21st, there is no way back to reality. On September 21st, Putin's war entered a new phase. Previously, Russians went to war by their own choice, at least officially, either as professional soldiers or as volunteers. Previously, Russians paid for their dictatorship with their well-being, with their future, and with the future of their children. Now, everything has changed. Since September 21st, the Russian government has introduced a completely new tax on Russians, their lives. A well-known children's poem from the 1920s is now going viral over Russian social media. It's the story of a cockroach who intimidated all the other animals, became their leader, and gave them the following order.
You animals, why don't you bring me your babies? I'll eat them for supper tonight.
To sweep his defeat in this war under the rug, Putin is sending hundreds of thousands of Russians to his war. The Defense Ministry claims it's a limited mobilization. Only those who have already served in the army and have combat experience will be drafted. But in reality, anyone and everyone is being called up and sent straight to the battlefield. In Moscow, city famous for its cultural and social life, for its comfortable infrastructure, mobilization centers are being opened in museums and theaters, according to the authorities, for the convenience of Moscow residents.
Temporary mobilization points will open in Moscow for the convenience of residents. The creation of temporary mobilization points will help ensure comfortable conditions both for the mobilized and for those who live in the immediate vicinity of the active military registration and enlistment offices. Also, for the convenience of mobilized people, transport will be organized from the buildings of the military registration and enlistment offices to the temporary mobilization points.
Russia is turning into a dystopia before our eyes, as the publication Medusa puts it. In the 21st century, Stalinism is returning to a nation of smartphones and the internet, to cities of electric scooters and car sharing, to a modern Russia of burger joints, coffee shops and gourmet restaurants. Political scientists and journalists, myself included, have long compared today's Russia to Stalin's. Putin uses the same rhetoric and the same slogans. But there have always been valid objections to this analogy. Stalin's rule was built on mass repression, total violence, and omnipresent fear. Everyone had a friend, a relative, a neighbor, a workmate who had been repressed by the state. The entire nation was terrorized. Life was built on the single goal: survival. In Putin's Russia, it was not the case. Dissidents and activists are in jail. Yet the order is based on depoliticization and demobilization. But now, massive repression has finally come to Russia. A knock on the door at 6 a.m., a police officer and 2 agents at the entrance. You have 30 minutes to pack your stuff. In Russia, this is reality once again. Human lives have once again become state property. In villages, the people are rounded up, and there are reported cases of all or almost all men taken away for mobilization. 80 or 90 years ago, they were sent to camps or executed. Today, they are sent straight to the battlefield. Stalin locked farmers and their families in kolkhoz, Soviet collective farms. Collectivization was his answer to the grain supply crisis that his economy was grappling with. With mobilization, Putin is responding to his own crisis, the defeat of his military. Just as they did in the times of the Great Purge, the authorities are sending out orders of how many people they need, back then for execution as enemies of the state, and now to send them to their deaths in Ukraine. Here are the benchmark figures for several regions, according to journalists and local authorities.
Dagestan, 3 million inhabitants, 15,000 men. Nizhny Novgorod region, 3 million inhabitants, 7,500 men. Buryatia, 1 million inhabitants, 5,000 men. Yekaterinburg region, 4.2 million inhabitants, 9,700 men. Moscow, 12 million inhabitants, 16,000 men.
Once again, people turn into numbers on paper. The Ministry of Defense claims that 300,000 people will be drafted as part of the limited mobilization, but Putin's decree simply omits the total number. The decree's 6th paragraph is followed immediately by the 8th, while the 7th paragraph is completely hidden from publication, just as Stalin did not publish his execution lists. But unlike Stalin's time, Putin's mobilization has shown that there are in fact two Russias. In one Russia, people agree to live in Putin's fictional world, the dystopia that he has built. And they are ready to go to war. If it has to be done, they and their families say, then it has to be done. They obediently pack their bags when drafted and say, those at the top know better. But the other Russia is fleeing. Hundreds of thousands of people have left in a matter of days. Hundreds of thousands more are still gathering at the borders of neighboring countries. Kazakhstan has become the main refuge, with its border with Russia expanding over 7,000 kilometers. It has been already reported that since September 21st, 100,000 Russians entered the country in less than a week. Thousands of people are stuck at the border with Georgia. Thousands are fleeing to Mongolia. On the 5th day, protests against mobilization broke out in different corners of Russia: Dagestan, Kabardino-Balkaria, Yakutia. State propaganda already acknowledges that the implementation of mobilization is going on with mistakes and calls to correct them. But this does not mean that the government is backing off. Stalin too spoke of occasional overzealousness when the farmers rebelled in response to collectivization. Having announced mobilization, Putin moved to a fundamentally different relationship with the nation. Now it does not matter what his approval rating is. Now, like under Stalin, his power is based on total violence and fear. However, the developments after September 21st have shown that Putin does not control all of Russia. The reality has found its way into Putin's universe, isolated from the world by propaganda and repression. And sooner rather than later, it will destroy it.